to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. The best and brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes. We'll talk to them all, and we'll get the good, the bad, and the ugly on how they made it. Decoding the secrets of success. And now your host, Terry Barr.
Welcome into Grind to Growth to Greatness. I'm here with one of many interesting guests I've had in the past about 7 months. But this guy's a special guy in my life, in my heart. This gentleman is one of my friends from long ago, but he's done many exciting things over the past 25 or 30 years. So I want to introduce you to him. He is Lieutenant Colonel Mark Borocz. He is a past Air Force lieutenant colonel. He was a fighter pilot. He flew F-16s, and he is currently retired, but he's working for Delta. And I wanted to have him on here because the more I get to talk to Mark, the more I appreciate his story and what he's been through in his life. He's very interesting. He's a very good orator. He tells great stories, and I hardly have, when I talk with him, I just ask a question and I get to learn so much. So I'm very excited to have him on. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Borocz, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Terry. That was a very humbling introduction. You left the part about how in high school we got to know each other by you boasting that you were going to be the best player on the team when Jeff Schaefer and I thought we were running the show. And then a year later, guess what? You're the best player on the team.
I was hoping you wouldn't bring that up. That was one of my...
I was going to lead with that.
You were going to lead with that. Get that off the table. Oh, my goodness.
No, I appreciate it, Terry.
Yeah.
Happy to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
Awesome. So most of the time we have guests in, we want to hear a little bit about their childhood, where they grew up, what their life was, how their family was, what kind of siblings they had, and hear a little bit about where you grew up and what prompted you into the Air Force eventually. So
Sure.
Tell me where you grew up. Tell me about your family a little bit. Start there.
Well, I'll steal a line from my favorite squadron commander of all time, because he used that as a way to introduce himself, and I think it's appropriate. For me, I was born at a very young age. And then I grew up to become a pilot, and that's pretty much it. That's the end of the story right there.
That's it, huh?
No, there's some important parts in the middle. I'm sure that's what you're querying about.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family on a rural street, 15 minutes from downtown Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. At the time, it felt like we were out in the middle of the sticks.
Yeah.
4 boys. I'm the second oldest of the 4 boys.
Okay.
Traditional, and I'm very happy to report that it was a traditional nuclear family. Mom and dad, 4 boys. Father was a banker, vice president of a local bank, and my mom was a homemaker. And the boys and I spent most of our days out playing on the streets, after the homework was done. And we were in a neighborhood filled with other young boys and girls. And so we had a traditional childhood from the 1970s era, which I think probably demonstrated for me, impacted me in a way that defined my life going forward. Yeah. I did have a couple of setbacks along the way. I'm sure we can talk about that if you like. But when I was 5 years old, I was diagnosed as a result of developing a limp that didn't seem to be a big deal to me at all. But upon further investigation, the doctors told my mom that their young 5-year-old boy had a condition known as Perthes disease, which to this day I have trouble describing in some detail, but I know very well that it only afflicts young boys, and it afflicted me in a way that caused the right hip in my leg to not get the proper blood supply, which meant over time it would cause me to not be able to walk. So at the age of 5, I was put in a wheelchair and on crutches and told that bed rest was the only way this thing was going to heal.
Good luck, right?
Yeah, I bring this story up, Terry, although it's not a dark and gloomy story of my past. It actually goes a long way to define my personality and my perseverance later on in life, because when you're told, when your parents are told that your 5-year-old boy might not walk past the age of 10.
Yeah.
And they seek out medical expertise to mitigate possibility that might not happen.
Right.
And then later on in life, when you appreciate all of the effort that was put forth to achieve that, and you've gone on to some success, moderate or otherwise, you look back and reflect very carefully that was a positive impact in your life. So that happened to me.
Yeah.
So if you imagine a young boy wearing a brace for some sort of condition where they don't have the function of their leg, that was sort of what I was forced to do. So for 4.5 years of my life,
how about that?
As a young boy,
4.5 years, wow.
I wore a leg brace that suspended my leg so that the right hip wasn't taking on the weight of my body, and allowed me to have some function, although obviously wearing a leg brace did make my mobility as a young boy a little bit suspect. But if not for them seeking out medical expertise that would provide for that, I might have just laid in bed for 2 or 3 years to see if it would heal on its own, which it might or might not have to. So that was my life. And then that came off at the age of 10, and now I'm playing Little League Baseball and, back on the streets playing with my friends like we always were. And
how about that?
Off we go. So, yeah, that was my life as a young boy. And then my brothers and I don't pretend to say that we're close in the way that, we were always together,
right?
But we were close in the way that we hung out together. We weren't ostracized from each other. Right. So I have very fond memories of hanging out with my brothers and all of their friends all through our young adult life or young childhood life. As a matter of fact, I don't think this even exists nowadays. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't. When school was out, for instance, for the summer, we would all gather at a local elementary school because they had daily classes
and things
and activities for arts and crafts, for sports, for
after school program kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. So our whole life was together, even during the summertime at the local elementary schools after hours. So that's how I grew up, and as a result of that, I developed a strong interest in mechanical things and sports and being part of a playtime, which commenced itself later on in my life as being part of a team and participating in a team. So I got all of that, I think, from growing up in a traditional family setting on a small street with a whole bunch of kids that like to just play and build forts and, go hiking in the woods and ride our bikes.
As they say, those were the days, right?
Maybe. It did lead to a sense of that I want to pursue mechanics in my life.
Interesting.
I know when you introduced me and when we talked prior, you were talking about wanting to learn how I wanted to be a pilot and how I got interested in flying. And obviously I'll share that with you. But at that point in my life, and even all the way through high school, quite frankly, I didn't have an interest in flying airplanes.
Okay.
I had an interest in mechanical things.
How about that?
Growing up on that street, I was the local bicycle mechanic. I was the kid who liked to take things apart to figure out how they worked and try to put them back together, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And so working with my hands and having an appreciation for learning how mechanical things work was something that I became very fascinated by and somewhat passionate about as a young boy.
Well,
so
let me take a quick break.
Of course.
And we'll be right back.
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr, Distinctive Real Estate, advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
Okay, we're back. And Lieutenant Colonel Mark Borocz was talking about his youth growing up, and he was just started to talk about his love for mechanical things, taking things apart, put them back together. He was the neighborhood mechanic, as he put it. So that was part of your childhood. Yeah. You have 3 brothers, right?
I do. There's 1 older, 2 younger brothers.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about being maybe not hanging out all the time, but you guys were together, whether it was after school or doing some stuff in the neighborhood, that kind of stuff. How many years between the the four of you, like youngest to oldest?
Yeah. We're all just about 3 years apart.
3 years apart.
Yeah.
Okay. And where do you land in that?
I'm the second to oldest.
Second to oldest. Yep. Okay.
My older brother, Michael, still lives here in South Central Pennsylvania with his 2 kids and now 4 grandkids. And there's me and my 2 younger brothers, Matthew and Mitchell.
And mom and dad are still with us, right?
They are.
Okay. Fantastic. Now, tell me where you went to school, went to high school. Now, you and I know each other, so some of these answers, of course, I already know, but when I hear about rural Pennsylvania, as you put it, where you grew up, where did you go to high school? And
yeah, well, I went to Redland High School. Obviously, with you, we were there 3 years together. And I want to pursue that a little bit more because what I studied there and what opportunities I had in high school made a huge impact for my life as well. But before I go there, my father, as you mentioned, he's retired now, but he was a banker.
Yes.
And the local bank, CCMB, later on in life bought out by PNC, but at the time, pretty significant local bank. Branches all over
for sure.
Pennsylvania. They sponsored the air show out of Harrisburg. And at the time, the Middletown Air Show, Harrisburg International, was a pretty significant air show. And every other year, it was big enough to host the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels or something impressive like that. And because my father was part of the
sponsorship or something like that.
The bank that he was VP for sponsored the air show.
Okay.
That came with certain opportunities to, meet and greet the air show participants that you might not have if you were just a ticket holder. So as a young boy, I had opportunities to be around some significant high performance airplanes, and I was always very enamored with them. But interestingly enough, because I mentioned that I liked mechanical things, I never really was fascinated by the operating of them, but more how they operated. So I pursued this was before I went to high school.
Okay.
I developed an interest in aviation or aviation related things, but it was mainly because I was fascinated by how they flew and how they were designed and how I might develop my life to be part of something like that. Never really dawned on me that I might someday fly them. I just wanted to understand how they worked. And I started building models of them like a lot of boys back then. When you weren't collecting football, baseball cards, you were building models. Most people were building ships or cars, and I was always building airplanes. So that's how I got interested in aviation. And it wasn't because I wanted to be a pilot, it was because I thought that I might pursue a mechanical life, pursuing aeronautics or aerospace related items.
Well, that's interesting because you and I, like you said, we went to school for about 3 years together. We played baseball, which was kind of at least for me, my friends were mostly baseball players because I didn't grow up around here. So you were certainly in my circle of influence, my circle of friends. And I didn't know that about you back then. I knew that you were a great student and a great player and a good friend. But at that level, at that age group, I had no idea. And then when I started learning about you was when you went off to school. Yeah. And I'd run into your dad
at the local
Starbucks or whatever. And he would fill me, how's Mark doing? What's he doing? And he would fill me in on what was going on in your life. So it's interesting to see what happens after people go away. If there's not a direct plan. And in your case, you're telling me, hey, I wasn't interested, or at least wasn't thinking I was interested in flying planes. So
no, it's true. My mom and dad got me one of those intro to flying lessons. I think when I was 15.
Okay.
You show up to the local airport, capital city, at the FBO, and some instructor takes you up in a Cessna 150 or 152, and
was that the impetus for your? No,
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, but I didn't come down from that going, that's what I'm
going to do. That.
No.
Wow.
Not even close. In fact. There's more to it, but I'll get to that in a second. So Redland. So yes, I had a knack for academics.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I liked school. I liked getting good grades. I liked studying. I liked paying attention. I liked being prepared. Yeah. So I did very well, I guess, if I can step outside my humility for a second.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
At grades. But all of the students that I was surrounded by on the college prep, because back then, high schools had specific courses that you could take for college prep that weren't normally part of the curriculum for anybody who was just going to get the high school diploma. And I was part of that program and loving it. But the influence to me wasn't that, and a lot of my fellow students that went to that program, that went off to the Princetons and the Yales of the world, and maybe have done quite well in their lives as a result. That wasn't really the path that I was pursuing. I didn't really know it at the time. And what kind of steered me away from that college prep, go to business school, become a finance person or something like that, was that at the time, Redland still had shop classes. And all my electives outside of the college prep stuff was shop class. I did metal shop, I did wood shop, I did small engineering,
mechanical.
They even had a mechanical drawing class at Redland High School. To this day, I adore mechanical drawing.
That's something. And I was actually in that class with you.
Well, and, even if I'm just doing a project in my little personal wood shop at home, I'll sit down on my writing desk and draw it all out, just like I was taught back in Redland. So the influence of working with my hands and figuring things out, almost like the puzzle, is what steered me towards engineering. And so I didn't want to go off to become a doctor or a lawyer or, a finance person. And I probably would have failed miserably at all of that stuff. But I did have a knack for solving problems, and I liked the engineering piece to it. So that's how I got interested in.
Yeah. So let me hit reverse a little bit. I'll take it off your story just a second, get your opinion on, in today's world. And, part of the reason I do the podcast is I really want to get people's opinions of today versus when we all grow up and what they think about certain issues in life. And today's student is faced with colleges that are $30,000 to $50,000 to $60,000 a year. They go in, they don't know what they want. They don't know what their major is going to be or where they want to pursue. Are there any answers to that? And from your perspective, as somebody that really kind of dialed in early, kind of knew what he wanted to do, was prepping for that, and went there and did that. And then, of course, we'll get into the rest of your story, how you ended up in the Air Force. But what's your opinion about today's education system as it relates to the young people that are lost in the wash at the moment?
Well, I don't want to come across as the kind of guy who's ready to put up the "get off my lawn" sign, out front of my house because the younger generation is lost and the planet is doomed and we're going off the side of the cliff. It's easy to think that way because I haven't gone through the struggles that maybe the younger generation is currently faced with. I didn't grow up with social media or iPhones or anything like that.
That's right. No.
And so it's easy for me to resist all of that stuff because it wasn't part of my life. But one thing that I would say that I believe to be true, that is a dang shame, is the folks that most of our youth, in my opinion, are almost brainwashed to the point where they think higher education is the only path in life. At whatever cost. And I don't subscribe to that. Now, I went to university to be an engineer, to be a lawyer, to be a doctor. This is a path that's required.
Right.
Otherwise, I sort of subscribe to the idea that university is for a classic liberal education, if you will.
Sure.
To study the arts, to study history, to study literature, to study philosophy. You get a classic, well-rounded, classic liberal education, and now you're a well-rounded, intelligent person. Sure. That is what education, in my opinion, should be and has always been intended to be. Nowadays, if you're somewhat disciplined, you can receive a classic, education on your own just by spending time with the, entire world at your fingertips. To go to school for the things that require the certificate, like in my case, to be an engineer. Okay, sure. That was the path that I had to pursue. The short answer to the question is, everybody listening, I'm sure, knows who Mike Rowe is, and he has it right.
Yeah.
The trades are important. I sit here right now saying that if I didn't fly airplanes for a living, I'd rather go be an electrician than sit at a desk somewhere, even though I maybe have some skills that could pursue a life sitting at that desk. And too many people, in my opinion, pursue an education that leads them to having a degree that really doesn't provide for any opportunities after the degree.
Yeah, and I think that's when the brainwashing thing comes in. I mean, whether it's parents that have always been taught that college is important or college is the only way, and then they're passing that down to their children. I mean, that's happened for 100 years. And now we're getting to the point where, like you said, and I read a lot, I listen to a lot of other podcasts, and I think it was Simon Sinek, if I'm not mistaken, said something to the effect that, you can get a college education in half the time on the internet by yourself if you're focused.
If you're focused. And that's self-focused. And to me, to get kids coming out of college with a $100,000 or $150,000, in some cases much more than that dollar debt, and not have any idea what they're going to do, no wonder the government's talking about, hey, we need to relieve some of that debt. That's part of the problem with kids right now and their mental health. I mean, coming out of college, you have nowhere to go. They have no job. If they get a job, their expectation is like they should make $100,000 a year right out of the gate. And we know that's not always the case. So I just was. Yeah, well, it isn't the case. And I don't think it necessarily should be the case. The expectation that because you have a degree means that you're a six-figure earner from day one is just ludicrous. College education, at least in my discipline, is just demonstrating the propensity for higher learning.
Sure.
And then you go get a job and you actually learn how to do that job that job. As an engineer, I had really no clue about, energy management and designing airplanes that, cater towards being able to sustain or hold energy until I went to work for a defense contractor who specialized in such things.
Yeah, so
I just knew how to do math and I understood engineering principles. And then I received my on-the-job training once I got to Northrop, which is who hired me out of college.
So let's reverse that back a little bit. Reverse the tape a little bit, jump back. I know we kind of got off at education for a second, but I thought it was important. But out of high school, you decide to go to college, correct? Where do you end up in university?
Well, as you know, I did okay in college, or in high school rather, as a baseball player, but can't talk because I'm sitting down, but look at me, I'm 5'6", and I don't have that big of an arm.
You're not second best. You're a good
I could play middle infield for a state championship winning high school team, but I wasn't going any further than that. But I did have aspirations of maybe playing college baseball for a decent team. And since I grew up going to Catholic Mass, Notre Dame was something that I really wanted to pursue. And my father went to a Catholic university just south of the border in Maryland. And unfortunately, to my discredit, my college application process as a senior in high school took a back seat to some other personal stuff. Neither here nor there. So I ended up not going to Notre Dame, although they welcomed me in as a sophomore and put me on standby, as a freshman, in case somebody got hit by a train or something like that. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. I guess fortunately, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
So I ended up going down the street in a small engineering school in Northeast Indiana called Tri-State University.
Tri-State, sure. Yeah, I know it, yeah.
They've renamed themselves years later to Trine University, but at the time it was like 85% engineering, just a couple of thousand students. Anything that I would do there as a freshman would be directly transferable when I had planned to go to Notre Dame as a sophomore.
Sure.
And so I ended up matriculating there after high school. Before I finished that story, let me sidetrack to say that I was interested in going in state, but I wanted to be an aerospace or an aeronautical engineer. And at the time, most of the Pennsylvania schools, Penn State included, were only the top four, mechanical, civil, electrical, chemical. So to find an aeronautical program, I had to go out of state. And so that's why I was pursuing this school. Plus Notre Dame was chief among my schools that I wanted to attend.
Yeah.
They recommended, and that's why I ended up going to the school. And then my first year there, I met a girl and I joined a fraternity and I was only attending class with 70 students versus 700 students.
Right.
And I fit in. So I ended up staying there for 4 years.
How about that? So When you decided to go into, for aeronautical engineering, was that a self-prompted thing for you? Did you actually know that I think this is what I want to do? Did you have mentors in high school or in your senior year, or mentors outside of high school that maybe your dad or maybe somebody else that you depended on? What conversations did you have before you actually pulled the trigger on aeronautical engineering?
Well, there are mentors in my life, but they came along much later.
Right, much later. Okay.
Now, I did look up to my father, but he was a accountant and a banker. Mm-hmm. So his forte wasn't science and math and engineering. Right. He was actually pushing me towards a commission and maybe attending, the U.S. Air Force Academy, something along those lines.
Okay.
I think probably at that point in my life, I had the good enough grades and I had extracurricular activities, and given his presence in the community, I probably could have got a sponsorship to do there. But frankly, even though you're talking to a 25-year-old retired lieutenant colonel, at that point in high school, I'm like, I don't want to be in the military. I got nothing for that. I don't want to do that. So no, I went off to a private university and resisted his counseling and mentorship towards, you might really enjoy the process and the discipline of a military career. And I didn't want to do it. So I went to the small university and then did 4 years there. And then a couple of years after I got out of the university, I ended up in the Air Force.
I tell you what, and I know your dad and I know you. And so I know you in high school, you go away to college. I don't know where you go, but I run into your dad all the time during that period of time. And I swear he's got stories that have molded my memory of what you went through. And part of that was, I thought Mark applied for Air Force and didn't get in. And then he went away to aeronautical engineering. I think he would talk to you about this. And so I had this story that was built up over 20 years that I didn't know the real answers to. Yeah. And I would tell people about you growing up out of high school until I was an adult. I knew this kid in high school. He really wanted to fly jets. He this, that, and the other thing. And he ended up going back and applying. So I'm really excited about hearing the actual story. So I
felt like I almost broke your heart the day I admitted to you in the cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
I didn't want to fly jets.
I was like, what? My whole story fell apart.
Yeah. But I did become passionate about it later on. So there is a culmination.
That's good. So you go away to school, you spend your 4 years, you get your time, you get hired by North.
Yeah. Well, so I spent 4 years in one semester in college, which is pertinent to what you want to learn about me.
Okay.
The college that I attended was the undergraduate school of a president and CEO of a company in Japan, in Hiratsuka, Japan, which is just south of Yokohama.
Okay.
Yokohama. And he would host 2 people from my university every year for about a 4 to 6 month stretch to come be interns at his company.
Wow.
Now, this is 1987.
Yeah.
So no desktop computing, and I didn't speak Japanese. So I got selected to be part of this internship, myself and a fraternity brother of mine. Mm-hmm. And we left half a semester early from our last semester in college to spend the summer in Japan and then come back in September. So I ended up being about 4 months there.
Okay.
The truth is, it was very enjoyable, but I really didn't do an internship for engineering. It was mainly I was a Japanese factory worker for 4 months, but I got to learn everything about how Japanese factories operate just in time.
That in itself is something pretty interesting.
By the way, if anybody out there owns a 1988 Nissan 300Z, I would sell it immediately because chances are I welded the engine out for that was one of my jobs at the factory was welding
engine mounts.
Yeah, so this company made parts for Nissan, and they also had a pressing factory which stamped with a 500-ton press, canisters that they would turn into fire extinguishers, scuba tanks, that sort of thing. So I got to do all of that, and it was just an experience of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Plus, side note, while we were there, the family took us on vacation with them. So I got to go to Kyoto. We got to hike Mount Fuji and watch the sunrise, which is sort of a mecca, in late July, early August in Japan, that sort of thing. So I applied for the internship, which was the first time in my life I was sort of taking a risk, and ended up being just a huge adventure, which gave me a taste for having adventure in my life, which is also very germane to why I left Northrop to join the Air Force. So I came back, but because I had left a half a semester early from college, and because the internship gave you experience and maybe a resume builder and something to talk about, it didn't give you any credit towards your engineering degree. So I had to stay for one additional semester to satisfy like 3 credits.
Right.
So I picked the easiest math class I could come up with, like vector analysis or something. Very simple. And so I spent the entire semester going to class like twice a week. And oh, by the way, even though I was graduating with an aeronautical degree, until I flew to Japan from Chicago for that internship, I'd never even been on an airplane. Except except for that 152 ride back when I was 15. I'm on a 747 flying to Tokyo. It was my first time ever on an airplane. My senior engineering project, because we were just developing the new technology back then of CAD-CAM. So we were using 3-dimensional drawing as part of our senior project. So I had to design an airplane, right? So I essentially designed a 727. But so I designed an airplane, but I'd never even been on one until I climbed on the 747 and fly to Tokyo for this internship. And while I'm flying back, I'm like, man, this seems like it's pretty neat.
It's pretty interesting.
We operate in these things. So when I got back and I went to 3 months more of college before I could officially graduate. And I spent all 3 months getting my private pilot's license. All of a sudden, I'm like, I wouldn't mind trying this. Yeah. So with the money I had saved up from the internship and as partly a gift from my father for graduation, I had enough money to go to take private pilot lessons right at the local aerodrome in Angola, Indiana. And in 3 months, I got my private pilot's license.
How about that?
And then I graduated officially, but now it's like November, right? So, the hiring season's come and gone. I send out 10 resumes to my dream locations. And I get a call from the first 2 within like a week.
Oh my God.
Talk about better lucky than good. One of them is Northrop. Now Northrop Grumman, but at the time it was just Northrop.
Now were they West Coast at that time?
Well, they have operations all over the country and the world for different divisions. But I was hired to be part of the aircraft and power plant division, which is Hawthorne, California.
Okay.
So just if you're on final to LAX, about 2 miles from landing, you're passing Hawthorne Boulevard and the Northrop plant.
So you spent a couple years there, which was good, I assume.
Yeah.
And then at some point within that 2 years, somehow you make a hop over to the Air Force.
Sure.
What's the plan? How in the world did that happen?
Right. So here it is. I studied to become an engineer, and I very much enjoy it. And I'm getting hired by one of the best engineering companies for building high-performance airplanes on the planet. They had just successfully launched the B-2, and now they were in the middle of the competition of the F-23, which is their competitor to what is now the Air Force F-22.
Okay.
Of course, Lockheed Martin won that competition, but Northrop was building the F-23 to compete against that. And so they were in a hiring frenzy for young engineers, and they bring me out there from this small, Indiana Midwest university. And I'm surrounded by the likes of guys from MIT and Cal Poly and USC and Stanford. And, they all have 70-pound nuggets because they have so much knowledge in their brains. It's got to weigh 70 pounds just to contain it all. And I couldn't program my way out of a wet paper bag, but I knew how to solve problems and fix things. So they hired me into the performance engineering department, which included wind tunnel testing and modeling, which I adored. And that meant that I got to go on trips to do wind tunnel testing.
Places,
all over the U.S. We didn't do it all right there on the plan. We would rent wind tunnel facilities around the country to go do modeling. Now, I didn't work on the F-23. I was brought in to be part of the Black World programs. Northrop was heavily involved in
what kind of program was that?
Black World is a way to describe top secret special access type stuff.
Yeah.
Most of it's probably still classified, so I don't want to step over.
No, I'm not. Don't want you.
But most of I talked about the part of the job I really liked. Yeah. But 80% of my job, frankly, Terry, was I'm in a cubicle with a cubicle mate. Nice guy. I'll talk about him in just a second. and no desktop computing back then, just mainframe stuff. So you would put together the program that you wanted to run for whatever analysis you had to do for whatever widget you were designing. And then you would hand it to the computer guys. They would run it to the mainframe, give you the results, and you spend all day at your desk trying to analyze the results. And it wasn't really that sexy, and it wasn't really that enjoyable, and it wasn't romantic. It wasn't, being on the flight, ramp with the white lab coat and the clipboard and smelling JP8 and analyzing the airplanes.
It's not like you see on TV, I guess, huh?
For all you pilots out there, I was the guy creating those chase-through charts that we all hate to calculate takeoff and landing data. That was my job.
That was your job.
It wasn't really that fun.
Okay.
But about, I would say, 9 to 12 months into it, being paid really well, living in South Carolina, living in Southern California. I'm into motorcycling and I'm into, hanging out on the beach. And so it's a great place to be
for those of you that don't know, they're watching the show. This is actually the Top Gun movies was modeled after this guy. He's got the motorcycles. He races Ducatis. I mean, this guy's like incredible. Anyway, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah. Well,
just keep going.
I have a very flippant comeback from that. I don't know that my humor would be received well.
It'll be fine. You can say whatever you want.
I'll say that. So be that as it may.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a great life, being a young man in Southern California and with, the climate and the activities. But if you're a young professional engineer, you shouldn't be staring at your watch on a Friday afternoon waiting to get out of there so you can go play beach volleyball with your friends the next day. Not that that's an unworthy pursuit.
I get it.
I was starting to get a sense that, maybe I wasn't motivated. And then the catalyst for me to give the Air Force a call was my cubicle mate.
Really? Okay.
Nicest guy in the world. And I mean that sincerely.
Yeah.
Name was Mike. Beautiful life, beautiful bride. A nice little house in the hills overlooking the ocean.
Yeah.
But I was hired. I was 24 years old, maybe 23. He was 55. Now I'm 58. So I'm like, man, that guy was old. But
you're looking at him.
I'm looking at him as a 55-year-old guy. And he's sitting in this cubicle doing the same job that I'm doing. And he'd been doing it for 30 years.
Wow.
And no, again, he was content. And
they loved his life. Yeah.
But I looked at that guy and I'm like, I can't be that guy in 50 years. Now, there's opportunities, especially for something like that to move up, project lead.
Those moments aren't my mistake, though. I mean, those moments happen for a reason,
Yeah,
for sure.
If I weren't at my job, I was out flying a Cessna 172 around the LA basin. On the weekends, I would take my girlfriend up to Santa Barbara for lunch or dinner. Out to Catalina Island to hike with my buddies, just enjoying that part of it.
It's a solid life right there.
Yeah, really getting into the whole flying as a little bug smasher, pilot. So after, I guess it was only about a year, maybe 14 months at the most, I gave the Air Force a call and said, look, engineer, I got a private pilot's license, you guys hiring? And you got to talk to a specific recruiter if you're looking for a commission versus enlisting. Because to be a pilot in the Air Force, obviously you have to be a commissioned officer. So I sought out one of those guys, and he looked at my credentials and he says, "All right, man, let's get this application rolling."
Really,
you're in. No, he can't make that guarantee, but he was
pretty much knew though. Yeah,
he's looking at the potential. So. I had to go take the Air Force qualifying test. The FOQT is what they call that. And unlike this podcast, which I'm woefully unprepared for, I studied like crazy, like I did for everything in my life. And I should have prepared for that test, and I did very well on it. And that was the catalyst. And
now that test, which FOQ?
AFOQT, Air Force Officer Qualifying Test.
Okay. AFOQ. That test, is that qualifying test, is that something that is given to all of those years' applicants, and then they place you based upon how you perform in that test? Or tell me about that test and what that means.
No, I wish I could go into detail about that. Quite frankly, I don't know.
Okay.
It is one of the pieces that they use to determine your eligibility.
I gotcha.
It's basically a cognitive test,
Sure.
Spatial awareness, that sort of thing, puzzle solving,
Mm-hmm.
just to make sure that if they put you in front of a panel of instruments, you'll be able to learn how to interpret what they mean.
Sure.
In all sorts of conditions, upside down, right side up, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's a cognitive test, frankly. There's other things, like in the SATs or the ACTs, there's some learning comprehension, that sort of thing, but basically it's a cognitive test. They piece that together with, your college resume, which includes your grades. I used to think foolishly, that, being an engineer meant that, you're obviously a great candidate to be a pilot, but that's, of course, horse hockey. It might or might not mean that, but just like I used to think if you couldn't hit a baseball, there's no way you could be a good pilot. But that's all very false as well. But they did like the idea that I was an engineer because it demonstrated the higher learning potential, I guess, or the ability to learn quickly. So it's all, let me say it this way. I'm being long-winded. The real test for me anyway, and things change over the years. The Air Force hires differently now than they used to. But for me, back then, the real test was that just gets you the interview. Okay. Then you come in and you interview with an active duty officer, which they choose, and how that interview goes, just like for a job in the corporate world, really is kind of what signs you off as like, yep, let's bring this guy and give him a chance. So, I was a pilot. I did well in the test. I had an engineering degree. I was young enough, so I was a good candidate. The interview went pretty well, so they gave me a shot.
So you get commissioned then. And then you come in, you do the, obviously you go to basic training or whatever they call that, and you go to the Air Force Academy?
No.
Or you do it at their...
So I left Northrop just after 2 years.
Okay.
And when I got accepted by the Air Force for a pilot candidate, they, it was going to be 6 months before I would report for officer training school.
I see.
Famously in the Navy, Richard Gere made a movie about AOCS, which is the Navy version of that, officer candidate school. In the Air Force, it's called OTS for officer training school.
Okay.
It's the same idea. You graduate from that and you're commissioned officer.
Where's that held? Like, well, I mean, maybe it's all over.
No, these days it's at Maxwell Air Force Base, which is Montgomery, Alabama. When I was brought in, it was still Lackland Air Force Base, which is in Texas.
Okay.
Lackland Air Force Base is the home of basic training for the U.S. Air Force.
Gotcha.
And they have an annex, then called the Medina Annex, where they would hold officer training school. They've moved that now to Alabama, but when I went through, it was in Texas. So, I go in to see my boss who hired me for a 5 to 10 year guarantee.
Right.
And I tell him after 2 years I'm leaving, and it was kind of hat in hand, very.
Yeah. Help me out there.
Well, I was sad and felt a little disappointed that I had to report that, after he took a shot, to hire me out of this small little school in the middle of nowhere. And I had a knack for doing what he hired me to do, but I just didn't want to do it for 50 years. So I decided to join the Air Force, and they picked me up, and I had to tell him that.
Yeah.
And when I told him that I was going to the Air Force to fly airplanes, he just couldn't be more excited for me.
Oh, that's great.
He's since passed away, but his name was Joe Bly, and he was like my proud grandpa.
That's awesome.
He was so excited for me, which is the day I learned that a lot of the engineers that I worked with back then are kind of all pilot wannabes at heart if they had an opportunity to do it for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And that was, my first big risk in life. Well, I guess going to the internship was a small risk, but this was a big risk because I'm leaving a pretty lucrative engineering job for a major Defense 500 company to take a shot to fly airplanes, not even knowing that I could do it.
Well, that's an interesting part of that story because there's a mindset switch there, and it feels like that your mindset was kind of, call it self-groomed over the period of 5 or 6 or 7 years through college and then through the couple years. I'm interested to know, like, at the day that you said, yeah, I'm going to call the Air Force, what that day looked like for you. Like, what, for a guy that you've already a self-subscribed guy that doesn't take risk or didn't back then anyway, what did that day look like for you? Like, when you pick the phone up, when you make that decision, what prompted that, if you can remember that?
Well, I wish I had a specific moment in time that I could say was the catalyst. I think for me, Terry, rather, it built up over a weeks. I had the maturity to know that I should be a lot more motivated to pursue this engineering gig. I mean, I signed up for master's degree at Cal Poly. I was already 2 classes into getting my master's degree. You're an engineer in training until you can pass the professional engineering test and then become a professional engineer. So I was studying for that. So I was doing the right things, but I just didn't seem nearly as motivated as always been in my life towards anything, whether it was sports, whether it was grades, whether it was, just, an opportunity. I just didn't come to work motivated. And so after about 12 to 14 months, I think it was the old, looking at my watch, going, is there a way I can get out of here 30 minutes early to go ride my motorcycle and hang out with my girlfriend and then go play volleyball on the beach, which is to my discredit, and I wasn't like that my whole life. And all of a sudden I'm looking for opportunities to not, I don't know about work. So
I don't know if that's a discredit. I think we all go through a period. Maybe you've only gone through 1 or 2. I don't know, but I think we all go through these moments where if you're listening, your conscience tells you what's right and what's wrong. And I think we're all born with that conscience to say, am I mature enough to listen to it or not? And I think a lot of people get there later in life. I mean, to be honest with you, it took me a long time to get to the point where I'm like, I'm 1, not happy with what I'm doing. And 2, I've got to figure out something. And I remember the day it took me 14 and a half years when I owned my Subways, and, which was about a month or 2 before 9/11. I'm standing in the mall at my brand new Subway, looking inside the store out. And I thought, what am I doing? I'm 40 years old. I can't stand what I'm doing. How do I make a change? And I think to have that moment that early in your life is, like you said, you were mature enough to do that. And I think there's more people that need to listen to that conscience, because I think God gave you a conscience for a reason. They gave you that, that sense of right and wrong, a sense of what should I be doing in my life.
Yeah, well, of course, the sense of right and wrong is written in our hearts, whether we want to acknowledge it or not.
That's right.
In my case, I was blessed with the ability to reason and have a little maturity. Now, as a young man, I didn't always have the discipline to follow it, but at least I had the maturity to know. And I'm flying. I mean, it's just a little what's that? I make fun of it now. No disrespect to jet aviation pilots out there, but I'm flying a Cessna 172 all over California, and whenever I'm piloting this airplane around, I'm having the time of my life.
Yeah,
having so much fun, whether it's the destination or just for the love of being airborne. And I'm thinking, man, I could get paid to do this. Yeah. And then meanwhile, when I'm working at my job, I'm really sort of not that motivated like I should be, and so that was sort of that catalyst towards maybe I'm not the guy meant to design the airplanes, but I would have more fun being the guy operating them. Be up front versus standing in the back.
So you get hired. The Air Force says, "Yep, we'll give you a shot." You get commissioned. I know there's a process, at least from what I've read on a couple of my other interviews. There's a process before you get your jet. Yeah. Tell me about that process. You flew F-16s your entire career? No? Okay. So tell me about the process when you finally they say, okay, this is your jet.
Right.
Tell me how that works.
Oh, man.
That must be like, it's okay, man. We got time. We got time.
Well, we got time. I'm at your disposal. At the risk of boring people.
No.
Frankly, the way it works is, in the Air Force, to fly airplanes, you have to be a commissioned officer. So I didn't go to ROTC in college, the Reserve Officer Training Corps. I certainly didn't go to the Air Force Academy, much to my father's disappointment. But it worked out fine.
Yeah.
In fact, when I got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, my father, who interviewed with the 2-star, who emceed that ceremony, told the 2-star who promoted me about him pushing me towards the academy. And then when I got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel during the ceremony, the 2-star who hosted it brought that up, said, "Hey, just should have listened to your father. It's been a lot easier."
But a lot
truth is, I don't think it would have. It was a good story, and I like telling it, but I got to where I am, and I'm who I am because I went that path.
Yeah.
And if not for that, maybe not. But I prepare for OTS thinking it's going to be just like in the movie, which it isn't. No discredit to the Air Force, but it's not like AOCS in the Navy. It's more academics and mental type stuff than it is physically demanding. But I'm not taking any chances. So I'm getting up and running 5 miles every day and doing 1,000 push-ups a week and getting ready, for the 6 months that I had to train to get ready. And I was driving a little Nissan Sentra at the time, and I drive it all the way to Texas, and I pause out in the front gate, the Medina Annex, take a deep breath, thinking that here we go, right? Just like in the movie, because I didn't know any better. And I roll on in, and then the upperclassman welcomes me, opens my door, asks to get my bag, and says, "Hey, we're all meeting up there for coffee and donuts, and we'll have the in-dock briefing when everybody gets here." I'm thinking, man, they're really screwing me here because I'm going to start yelling at what's coming next. Right. So OTS in the Air Force isn't like the movie, but it was still challenging. And it's only 3 months long. At least that's how long it was back then. Yeah. And it's just the basics to, graduating you as a second lieutenant in the Air Force, a butter bar, as they call it. Okay. So now I'm a commissioned officer, and then 2 weeks later, I report to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, just outside of Chandler on the southeast side of the city of Phoenix. Yeah. It doesn't exist anymore. I'm the very last first assignment IP in the T-37.
Oh, is that right? T-37, that's a training plane, right?
I say that because years later, when I went through training and got brought back to being a first assignment instructor, that's when they announced the closure of
is that right?
Base. So I was the last guy to be brought back to be an instructor there before they closed the base. Now it's called Williams Gateway. It was just a giant general aviation airport with 3 very long runways. Yeah. I went off to Phoenix, Arizona to do my undergraduate pilot training, UPT. Yeah. And that's 12 months, and you do a couple weeks of academics, and then you hop into the simulator and the primary jet training. At the time was a T-37. Yeah. So you have 5 to 6 months of that. Yeah. To include, a couple of check rides and all kinds of different flying, formation, contact, which is doing loops to music, TV stalls, formation, navigation, etc. And then 6 months later, you advance to advanced jet training, which at the time, everybody going through undergraduate pod training flew the T-38. Okay. Famous because that's the airplane that you see chasing the space shuttles, sort of. Oh,
is that right?
Yeah, it doesn't have the Talon designed by Northrop Grumman.
How about that?
Company that I was working for. Fast airplane, very challenging to fly. Yeah. In a lot of ways, more challenging than an F-16 or any fighter for that matter, because it's got a small wing.
Really base and really
no slats. The engines are very responsive. It lands at 180 miles an hour. So it is a 6 mile a minute airplane versus you were just spending your whole life going 2-3 miles a minute. Now they put you in this little white rocket, all right. So welcome to the Air Force. We expect you to get competent and proficient in this airplane, and you have a certain amount of flights to do so, and that's the standard, right? So. As the saying goes, you could teach a monkey to fly, but if you only have, 6 to 10 flights to become competent, and that's the standard, well, that's what you have to meet. So it's very intense, at least it was for me, to show up prepared every day, because in addition to the flying in the simulator, which is emergency procedures, you had daily stand-ups you had daily academics, etc. Mm-hmm. So it's a fire hose, sort of a year for you.
So did you find that of course, maybe minimally, but did you find that your experience behind the sticks of your Cessna, did that help to translate some going into jets? I mean, I know it's a different type of aircraft, but did it give you some sort of comfort or no?
Interestingly, no.
No. Okay.
At the time, the Air Force changes. This seems like almost yearly, but at the time, if you came into pilot training and you already had a pilot's license, you didn't go through a program that they call pre-screening. Oh, okay. For those who didn't have a pilot's license, before you showed up at pilot training, you had to go through a pre-screening program.
Gotcha.
And they've hosted that at different air patches around the country. But, essentially you fly a Cessna 172 and you're taught by Air Force contracted and or active duty instructors.
Gotcha.
And you get a smash course in, operating a Cessna 172 to the point where you can solo. It doesn't lead to a pilot's license, but it demonstrates to them that you have the ability to learn at the pace that the Air Force is going to require you to learn if they're going to send you on to spending all that money in primary and advanced jet training. That was way for me because I came in with a pilot's license, so I went right to T-37s. Mm-hmm. So no, I didn't feel like it helped, except for I understood looking at, an ADI or the aviation instruments. Back then it wasn't all digital. We had round dials for everything. So I had a basic working knowledge of that, and I had a basic idea of spatial awareness. So I guess in some way that was helpful. But the reason that I think it worked out well for me had nothing to do with that per se. It's just that I was the kind of guy that was never going to show up unprepared. So I chair flew everything
all the time.
And I studied like crazy, and I had no life because I had taken this risk to come do this. And there was no way I was going to not succeed.
Do you remember your first flight?
Yes. It's called the dollar ride.
Oh, that's right. The dollar ride.
Yeah. Famous because you have to give the instructor $1. And
I know about that.
Okay.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's kind of a grimy little tradition in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Back in, I graduated in class of 9107.
Yeah.
So, March of 90, when this would have been taking place, it was a different world. So that dollar is not something you're probably going to display on the, on your I love you wall nowadays, because they could be a bit vulgar, but it was still kind of a special thing.
Yeah, for sure.
And that dollar ride was really just an intro flight, right? No expectations whatsoever. But in the very next ride, they started expecting things from.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. Just generally speaking, to go too deep into it, but what did that first flight feel like for you? I mean, you took this big risk. You go through all the everything, and you're there, and now you got your first flight. What did that feel like? Do you remember that memory at all? Or
I do, mainly because we had to go through a lot of physiological training in anticipation of that first flight. Because in an Air Force high performance aircraft, unlike when you're flying around the world in an airliner, or even in my little 172 Piper Warrior type flying, you're always straight and level. You bank in the airplane, maybe 20, 25 degrees of bank. Now we're talking straight up, straight down, vertical, and that three-dimensional environment can wreak havoc physiologically on you if you're not ready for it or otherwise aren't accustomed to it. Mm-hmm. So much so that at the time, I don't know how it is nowadays, but at the time, most of the people that couldn't succeed is because they had a problem with not being able to...
the physiological part of it.
Yeah, they couldn't not get actively airsick, given the three-dimensional environment. And the airplane that I flew in primary jet training is unpressurized, no air conditioning, on a hot Phoenix day.
You got everything going.
We didn't have a parachute like we do in our modern day ejection seats, in the actual seat. And all I did was strap into the seat with a harness. Back then you wore your parachute, which weighed like 80 pounds. So you had that all going for you.
Wow.
It's upright seating position. So it's a very hot and exhaustive environment.
Yeah.
But I say all that because for whatever reason, that never was an issue for me physiologically. I'm glad about it, but I was very anxious about it because we've been told this is a real problem for a lot of people.
Sure.
But it ended up not being a problem for me. So I ended up just having the time of my life. It was the first time I'd been upside down in an airplane, and I just thought it was amazing. Everything is relative to where you want the nose to go on the airplane and the horizon. It's just something you reference to, keep in mind once you need it. But
well, I guess, and again, I don't. The last interview I had with somebody that was a pilot, I made sure she knew I have no experience in flying planes whatsoever. So if I'm out of line here, you can just tell me. But with a high performance jet like that, I mean, time speeds up so fast. I mean, you make, you're going towards the ground. You're not going at 50 miles an hour. You're getting it. So did it take a while for you to kind of adjust to the speed of things and the spatial awareness of
where
that got you and how fast it got you there?
Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The T-37, for those who out there might have ever flown this thing, is not exactly high performance. Big Hershey bar wing. You know, when you're on takeoff roll, you put the power up and you count to like 13 for the power to finally come up to full power for that thing to be able to roll down the runway. So it's a pretty slow airplane. All right. High performance compared to a Cessna 170.
I got to get myself then, I guess.
But you know, it's fun, you know, and it does, you know, turn upside down and, you know, operate in an environment which is unlike you would have in the civilian world unless you're doing aerobatic type flying. Once you graduate to the T-38, which is a true high performance airplane comparatively anyway, maybe not, you know, compared to a fighter, but still as fast as it flies and as challenging it is to learn how to land, it can be quite anxious. So, to answer your question, I never really, I guess, was sort of going with the momentum of the program. From day one, I was confident that I could get through it. It only took me flying the Tweet T-37 a couple of times to know that I can do this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now it was just being motivated to show up prepared and making sure that I didn't highlight myself in a bad way. And you got to do check rides and you got to pass certain phases and that sort of thing. And you know, as long as you keep plugging away and making sure that you show up prepared, all of that is in an effort to establish yourself, because you can't speak to the military nowadays, and nor would I want to, but at least back then, it was a true meritocracy in that, you know, the top graduate, you know, was ranked to the bottom graduate. Now, everybody met the standard.
Sure.
But when you graduated pilot training, your awards, your follow-on airplane was based on your rack and staff.
How many people were in your class?
We started out with 36.
Did you say you ended with 24? Is that what you said?
No, we graduated 30.
Oh, 30.
So we lost 6.
Okay.
And back then that was a 3-week cycle. Every 3 weeks they would have a new class of anywhere from 30 to 35, 36.
Oh, wow. Every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really putting
the screws to it. How about that?
Yeah. The throughput was pretty amazing. Now, interestingly enough, 2 years later, it all stopped, which led to a phenomenon in the Air Force called the banked pilot system, where they were graduating pilots because they were putting all of these pilots through pilot training, but they didn't have the throughput in the follow-on major weapon systems training units. MDBS, whether you go into fighter, tanker, cargo, bomber, you know, they didn't have enough throughput through that. So you would graduate pilot training and then you would not fly for 3 years.
Really?
You know, go run the golf course or be a bean counter.
That's crazy.
And then come back 3 years later to initial.
That type of change, that type of wholesale change, is that typically because of politics? Change in politics? Is that what typically makes one of those changes, whether it's...
I don't know so much about that, Terry. Maybe. I would just say it this way. To give the Air Force some credit, you know, and necessarily so, you know, we're at the whim of civilian, you know, leadership. That's the way the military is set up. That's the way it has to be in our system of government. But that also means that you have the new sheriff in town every 4 years, right?
Yeah, of course.
With them a new administration and a new way of doing things. And that causes the military to sometimes go
that's really what I meant. That's the flow of those kinds of things.
Right.
For sure.
And the downside, unfortunately, the good side is that, you know, the military is subordinate to civilian leadership. The downside is it sometimes becomes difficult for the military and the Air Force in particular, which is what I'm familiar with, to really focus on the strategic, 15, 20 years down the road. We're always kind of thinking about, to put it in fighter pilot terms, you know, your priority 1 is don't hit the near rocks. Priority 2 is don't hit the far rocks.
Yeah.
And then everything else is tertiary to essentially don't crash the airplane.
Sure.
And so, you know, that short-term way of looking at problem solving sometimes leads to what we're talking about. They're putting pilots through by the masses because of a pilot shortage, and then they run out of slots because they don't have the throughput for the MWS systems. So they bank these guys. And then years later, now we have a pilot shortage, but we don't have the ability to produce pilots at the pilot training bases because we shut 2 of them down. It was 5 when I went through pilot training. Now we've since shut down Reese Air Force Base and Williams Air Force Base, which is where I graduated. And so now when they need to ramp up production of pilots, they don't have the ability to do that too.
So tell me about, you go through all the training like you talked about, and you do your 6 months, and they rank you out of the 30 guys or whatever. Where did you rank?
It's undergraduate pilot training is 12 months total.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So when you graduate from that, that's when you get the highly coveted silver wings, and you're now an Air Force pilot. But
okay.
you don't have a weapon system.
Right.
Now you go to the training for whatever airplane you're assigned.
So
how you get assigned that?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I know that's what you're getting at. When I was in pilot training, they still had a system which they referred to as FARD. FAR. Don't ask me what that acronym means because I've long since forgotten. But what it essentially translates to is for you to be an aircraft commander, you had to graduate in the top 30% of your class.
Okay.
Now, everybody that graduated met the Air Force standard, but if you weren't in the top 30, you couldn't be an immediate aircraft commander. Now, the only airplanes that required you to be an aircraft commander right away was fighters because they're single seat, or if you're an E-model F-15, you're still the pilot in command sitting up front, or coming back to be a first assignment instructor, either in the T-37, T-38. If you went on to fly a bomber, a cargo, or a tanker plane, you were going to be, in the airline business, we call it first officer. In the Air Force, that's called aircraft commander and co-pilot. So you're going to sit in the right seat and be a co-pilot for a couple of years before you upgrade to aircraft commander.
I see.
So I can tell you without any doubt in my mind that I was at least in the top 30% of my class.
Okay.
But they don't advertise that position. Years later, you knew exactly where you ranked because they changed the way assignments got handed out. So more detail than you care about. But back then, your assignment was given to you based on, yes, what you asked for, but also what your squadron commander thought would be a good fit for you, and based on what the Air Force needs were. I mean, every drop didn't include every single airplane. And only the top two people in the class, we called them the protected guys, the number one and the number two guys, they got to pick whatever they wanted.
Gotcha.
Assuming that airplane was on the drop.
Gotcha.
So I clearly wasn't number one and number two because I didn't get to pick my airplane. But in my case, number one and number two went on to a B-2 and an F-15E.
Really? Okay.
And the next 8 of us got brought back to be first assignment instructor pilots.
Is that
4 in the T-38 and 4 in the T-37. So I was in the top 10. I don't know where.
How about that?
Doesn't matter. So to be a FAPE, you had to be aircraft commander qualified, and I was. They brought me back to be a FAPE, much to my disappointment, because I was chomping at the bit to go be part of the real Air Force, not stay and be an instructor teaching people how to fly the T-37. But that's what the Air Force needed of me, so that's what they asked me to do.
And how long did you do that? And I want to kind of change gears a little bit, because I want to add to it, your personal life and when that all came about. And I'll let you discuss that at your own pace. But how long were you an instructor when they brought you back? How long you were an instructor, and where were you located? Where were you stationed during that period of time?
Well, on assignment night when I graduated, which was April 1991, so 91.
Okay. It's coming up.
Yeah.
Coming up.
So I was awarded that. We had a giant skid for assignment night, which is great fun.
Yeah.
And I got my assignment. And so now I have to go to Randolph Air Force Base, which is the home of Air Education and Training Command. And that's where they teach you how to be an instructor pilot in that airplane.
Gotcha.
So you go down there. At the time, it was about a 3-month program.
Is that Alabama?
No, that's San Antonio.
Oh, that's San Antonio. Okay.
And so you learn how to be an instructor in that primary jet. And then you go back to Williams Air Force Base, where you serve as a line IP, and, you're the bottom guy. So you're the assistant to the assistant grade book officer, the snack bar officer. And then eventually you get to be, you get promoted to being maybe like the stand-about guy, or, the scheduler, that sort of thing. And you learn all the basic functions of a squadron, frankly. But your daily job is to teach how to fly the airplane.
Okay.
For all of the undergraduate pilot students, which you were just one of 6 months ago.
5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago. Well said. Exactly. So it was a little surreal at that point, but I don't know what it is. I just seem to have a knack for instructing. So I liked it and I enjoyed it, and it was gratifying. But, I was a little bit anxious to go out and, fly something different. The opportunity came, but you have no control of that, Jerry. I mean, you don't get to say, all right,
don't say, I'm ready to leave long enough.
No, you're on an assignment. It's a controlled assignment. And at that point.
And how long were you on that assignment?
Well, it should have been just 3 years. And then I get to go do something different.
Okay.
Hopefully into fighters of some sort.
All right.
However, at the time, there was two things going against me. Number one was the Air Force had a volunteer assignment system, which means that if you're flying F-16s in Italy, you have to volunteer to leave that assignment. So who's going to volunteer to leave flying F-16s in Italy to go be a T-37 IP in Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi? Or something like that. You know, unless you're looking for weekends off, but mainly nobody. So the Air Force had let the instructor force grow to 75% first assignment guys like me.
Wow.
And they got to the point where they didn't have any mentorship because, you know, I could teach the airplane, but I had never flown anything else. I don't have a lot of stories to tell. I don't have experiences to draw from. I certainly can't, you know, motivate you because I don't know what's coming for you because I've never done it myself. So because of that, they had to keep us, well, I should say it this way, because we had so many first assignment IPs, and they had nobody coming in to replace us because of the nature of the volunteer assignment system. They held on to us for a longer period of time.
I see.
And that started the area in the Air Force, the era of the Air Force known as the Super FAPE. And some guys went like 5.5 years before they finally got out of there. And it just meant that once you got to the top of the pecking order, seniority based, it was your turn to get an assignment, but they don't let one guy per tweet and per T-38 go off at each base. So 5 bases times 2, 10 guys per quarter. We had a four quarterly assignment system back then. So that wasn't, given how many there were of us, that meant that if you did the math, you know, I'm looking at like 3 years.
3 more years.
Get out of here.
Right.
So I decided to take another risk, and I put my name in the hat to go be a Vape ALO.
Vape ALO.
Yeah. I say that like
not to be confused with JLO.
It's not impressive.
What is it?
Well, ALO is an acronym that stands for Air Liaison.
Okay, all right.
Think of it as a company grade officer that's in charge of administering close air support for the U.S. Army.
I gotcha.
You are trained to be the terminal air controller, you know, but you're not actually the guy doing that. You're the guy that's at the brigade of the Army helping them figure out how they could use Air Force assets for close air support for troops in contact scenarios. So you live and breathe with the Army during this. Well, again, volunteer airman system. Not a lot of A-10 guys want to leave the cockpit to go be ALOs in Korea for a year. So the Air Force said, well, I got all these FAPEs. You know, we need to get them out in the system. Let's go let them be ALOs. Even though I had never flown a fighter, I did know a Mark 82 from the CBU, and I was now going to go be in charge of controlling close air support into P51A, which is the prohibited area that defines the embarkation zone between North and South Korea.
I see.
So, but the first year that they did that, we're all like, we're not volunteering for this. We've been burned enough, you know. Because they said, here's the stick. You got to go to Korea for a year, but here's the carrot. When you get back, you can pick whatever fighter you want and go fly it.
Wow. So
nobody believed him. But then when they made good, by the time the second year round came,
everybody wanted to go.
They had people flying left and right. They had like 35 packages per base applying for this program because it was a way to finally get the heck out of FAPE and go do what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so by the third year, they only did it 3 years. The third year of the FAPE ALO, I put a package in to do it.
Yeah.
And I was number 3. At the time, I was Columbus Air Force Base. We didn't talk about it. But when I got back to Willie, they closed the base, which is why I'm defined as the last T-37 FAPE. And they closed the base. So I didn't have enough hours to qualify to go fly a C-141 or a C-130 or whatever they're going to put me in. So I got reassigned as an IP to Columbus Air Force Base.
Okay.
So Yankee Catholic flyboy going to the deep south. What could possibly go wrong?
Columbus, Georgia?
Columbus, Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi.
Yeah, just south of Tupelo.
Okay.
Well, again, side note, I felt that way going there.
Yeah.
Ended up being, the story of my life because I met my beautiful bride of 26 years.
That's where you met Carol?
Yeah,
okay.
I made friends that I still have to this day.
Fantastic.
On the weekends, we race mountain bikes all over the Southeast, and I just had the time of my life, never knowing that I would even want to be, in the Deep South, and I end up loving it.
Well, let's take a quick break. I want to take one more break here. and we'll be right back.
This episode of Grind to Growth to Greatness is brought to you by Terry Barr, Distinctive Real Estate, advising families across Pennsylvania and Northern Virginia for over 15 years. Visit the website at terrybarrealestate.com.
Okay, welcome back. We're back with Lieutenant Colonel Mark Borocz. He's just talked about his move to Columbus Air Force Base down in just below Tupelo, Mississippi. Is that what we said?
Yeah.
And he was just talking to us about this is where he met his lovely wife, Carol, and where he started his next assignment. So, Mark, jump back in.
Yeah,
sorry for the break, but that's okay.
No, it's all good, Terry. I feel like I'm being a bit long-winded about all this. It's special memories to me, but the point of it is this. I was really anxious to go do something else in the Air Force that I felt like mattered. Right. And this was sort of an opportunity to get there quicker than just sitting around.
Kind of a shorter route to where you wanted to go.
Yeah. And it included an adventure, go to Korea for a year, do something that I'm not qualified to do, but the Air Force is going to train me how to do. So there's a skill set. Plus, living in Korea is a bit of an adventure.
Sure.
There was one setback. I was number 3 out of like 17 guys that applied.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'm not going to get it because I'm number 3.
Yeah.
2 weeks after I was married, which was March in 1995, the squadron commander calls me in and says, "Hey, you remember that Fate Bay little thing that you applied for? Well, number 1, this is a proffer. Number 1 got his wife pregnant, so he doesn't want to go. And number 2 is declining it, so it's yours if you want it."
Wow.
And I'm like, Colonel Giannakis was there. I'm like, "You remember that wedding you were at 2 weeks ago? Maybe I should go talk to her.
Yeah.
See if she's going to be okay with me going to Korea for a year, because it's a remote, unaccompanied assignment."
Oh, is it okay?
Bring your family.
Yeah.
So, Carol and I talked about it.
Yeah.
She said, "Yeah, of course you have to do it. If that's what you want." She was supportive that way in my entire life, certainly in this case. And lucky for both of us, we had a house on base. Her father worked on the flight line as an electronics specialist.
Oh, fantastic.
She had grown up there, so she had friends, went to high school there and college there.
She was very familiar with the deal. Yeah.
Right. So me being gone for a year as a newlywed would have sucked, but at least I wasn't leaving her completely isolated from, her life.
How long before?
Well, I had 6 months because I didn't have to report until just before New Year's.
Right. So you had time to get to know her a little bit before you left.
Yeah, we did. And so I got to Korea to be a Fate Bailu for 1 year, and I meet two people that became dear friends. And at the end of that first night, the tradition, standard military stuff, you come in and they don't take you to Camp Red Cloud, which is north of the Han River, where I'm going to be based for the next year. Yeah. The first night, they take you to the 8th Army headquarters in downtown Seoul. They have a 4-star resort hotel called the Dragon Hill. And they take you out that night, and the Korean white wine flows like water.
Yeah.
So by the end of the night, Mary Jane and David Macaluso had me convinced
this is awesome
that I could have my wife there unaccompanied.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So Terry, I'm in Korea for one night, and I call my wife up, stone drunk. I'm like, "Pack your bags, you're coming to Korea." She was like, "What?" I'm like, "Well, I have to ask the Air Force first, but I think it's possible. Are you in?" So she's like, "Well, I think so."
Yeah.
So I talked to the Air Force after I got settled in for a week, and timing was perfect.
Really,
they had us in bachelor officers' quarter owned by the Army, and they were looking to renovate it so that if they could kick people out of there, they were welcome to do it. So the Air Force allowed me to have a basic allowance for housing. I got an apartment in Uijeonbu, Korea, like 5 minutes off the front gate of Camp Red Cloud. And I had to fly her over there at my expense, but the Air Force supported her with privileges for not just medical and the NEO plan, which is important for evacuations of
Gotcha.
If things go south between North and South Korea, they need to evacuate, the civilian families. So she's part of that plan. And then she had privileges for the base as well.
Wow.
So within a month of me showing up, my beautiful newlywed bride of less than a year is now having the adventure of a lifetime living in Korea.
So cool. Yeah.
It was terrific.
Very good.
She was the only wife in the entire base, because the Army isn't allowed to have their wives there. In the Air Force, nobody else had, once Mary Jane and David left, she was the only woman there. So she was sort of the mother hen of the squadron in our day room, which is code for a bar, because we're not allowed to call it a bar because we were an Army base, but that's what it was.
How about
that's
that?
What we all hung out after hours, the camaraderie of a squadron like that. And it's one of the things that I treasured about the Air Force, and she got to be part of it, for her first year together, for sure.
So you're over there for a year, you come back. Fast forward a little bit. Tell me where we're at when we get back.
Best call I ever got. Well, at the time in my life, it was the best call I ever got, which was the Air Force Personnel Center, the fighter porch, the assignments guys saying, all right, we got all your paperwork for Korea. We just got to know what airplane you want.
Wow.
I'm like,
that's the question.
Yeah.
Just need to know what airplane you want.
I get to pick.
Wow.
So, side note is, my dream sheet graduating pod training was F-15s, big, sexy air-to-air fighter.
Yeah.
But at this point in my life, I knew I wanted an F-16 because of the multi-role nature, air to ground and air to air. So I said, no, that's the one. All right, we got it. No second or third choice, whichever one you want. Because we had now 2 years of knowing that they were going to make good. And, the other great part about this penalty tour for 1 year in Korea, which actually was one of the most gratifying assignments of my entire career, frankly, but leadership and personally. But at the time, it's just a means to an end.
Yeah.
It included also a first assignment destination of your choice.
Oh, wow.
As long as that assignment destination was available. And in my case, it ended up working out. So I came back from Korea and had to go to F-16 RTU. This was in 1997, and that's a 1 year school at Luke Air Force Base. And then when I graduated that, I went to Aviano Air Base, Italy, for my first F-16 operational assignment.
Well, I have to tell you, the story that I had conjured in my mind, and I got bits and pieces from your dad, was a lot less exciting and interesting than the story you just told. So I'm glad to get all the parts together for that story. But you get your plane, because that was part of my story. He got to choose his own plane, so that was a piece of the puzzle that I had right, but nowhere close to the story. But so you get your assignment, and how'd Carol feel about that? Was she excited to go to Italy? And
well, I did the 4 years as a fate to finally get to the fighter operations, which is what I've been dreaming of doing the whole reason for joining the Air Force.
Right.
She was ecstatic. She was no small way the reason why I picked Italy, just to have a grand adventure. Terry, while we were in Italy, she went to university and became fluent in Italian.
Is that right?
Yeah, the first week that you're there, everybody goes through an indoc course, indoctrination, which is just to get you familiar with the local customs, get you familiar with the Status of Forces Agreement, the SOFA, help you learn how to navigate around. We didn't have base housing, so everybody had to go out and live on the economy. So you had to figure out where you were going to live, rent a place, that sort of thing. But the last day of that 5-day indoc program, they would bring an Italian language instructor in and just give you a few basic phrases, how to say hello, goodbye, meet and greet people. Just a basic thing. And then she announced, and oh, by the way, if anybody's interested, next week, I'll have a 5-day course and you can come back and get a little bit more in depth in learning the language. Yeah. Now I had to go to work, but Carol's like, yeah, I'm going to come back and do that. Well, these two ladies became great friends.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
And they ended up going to a lot of lunches and tea and coffees together. And then Carol ended up enrolling in school and learning the language officially.
How about that?
By the time we left, she was fluent in the language. So we'd be walking around the streets of Rome and, give me a couple of days, let my beard grow out and wear a leather jacket. And I can almost pass for a local. But Carol has fair skin and strawberry blonde hair and didn't really kind of fit in with the local scene. And somebody would walk up to me and say, hey, where's this or where's that? And I'm like, I don't know. Talk to the pretty redhead. And she started yapping at them in Italian and their jaw would just hit the straight. It was so much fun.
That's just
so yeah, we had the adventure of a lifetime.
How long were you over there?
3 years.
3 years. 3 years in Italy. And that was you said that was your first operational deployment. Yeah. Okay. And what exactly did you do over there as an operational deployment? I mean, you fly obviously often, but did you have anything else that you were flying into different?
Sure. Oh, I get your question. When I showed up in Albiano, this was in 1998, February. You know, it was the tail end of Bosnia.
Mm-hmm.
We were still engaged there, but it was no longer a conflict where we were being shot at.
Mm-hmm.
But we were still doing operational missions there. So from day one, after you got through mission qualification training, you were doing contingency operations.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was also the year that the Air Force decided they're going to start deploying European fighters. So the F-16s in Albiano and the F-16s in Spangdahlem, which normally were just held to do operations in Bosnia. Now they're going to start deploying them to do Operation Northern and Southern Watch. So a few months after that, I'm deploying to Turkey where we're doing Northern Watch out of Insular Turkey, Northern Iraq. And then we would deploy to, Kuwait to do Operation Southern Watch. That was mainly patrol. It was combat operations, but you immediately got shot up by some AAA every now and again. It wasn't really very threatening, quite frankly. But in the middle of all of that, in my 3-year tour, was when Allied Force kicked off. That's when we had the Kosovo and Serbia, shooting match that lasted for a couple of months. And that was fairly intense in that it was a proper, shooting match in that we were dodging SA-3s and SA-6s just about every time we went in the theater. In fact, my squadron commander got shot down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, famously. During that match, we were doing missions in and about the Belgrade area, which is the capital of Serbia.
Yeah.
But before we could get our bombs on target, we were getting launched at by SA-3s. And so we would do air-to-air missile defense maneuvers, which invariably meant that you would jettison your bombs to maintain energy so you could beat whatever was shooting at you.
Gotcha.
Which for the guys on the ground meant that they won the day because now our bombs are being jettisoned off the airplane. So the Air Force conspired to kind of figure out how we could target some of these sites, especially the more mobile ones, and then maybe eliminate them. So we didn't have the sensors that I retired with at the time. So we embedded 4 F-16 strike airplanes out of Albiano with 4 F-16 seed platforms out of Spangdahlem in a classic Wild Weasel type Vietnam era tactic where we would go in and get them to purposely threaten us so that we could try to discover where they were. And then the Spangdahlem guys could get a basic idea of it using their sensors. And then we could put our targeting pods near that area, especially if they shot, whether it was a hot spot, and then we can roll in and maybe destroy that site before it picked up and left. So during one of those missions, led by an old friend of mine on a mission check ride. Oh boy, Jammer, no disrespect, I love you, brother, but he's on a mission check ride with the squadron commander doing this very intense mission, and they get lit up by a bunch of SA-3s. And my squadron commander at the time, David Goldfein Fingers, who ended up being the chief of staff of the U.S. Air Force, but at the time he was squadron commander in the Triple Nickel in Italy. He was the wingman that day for Jammer number 2 of the 4 ship because he was giving him, as a flight examiner, a check ride.
Wow.
And they got lit up by some
check ride on a mission.
Yeah.
How about that?
We did that back then. Mission check rides. Yeah. In the fighter business, you get 2 check rides every 17 months. One is just basic navigation instruments, qualification to fly the airplane, and the other one is, can you do the mission? It was always sort of confusing to me why, if I'm actually doing the mission every day, if I'm doing it successfully, that I need a mission check ride, but that's how we did it. So he's on a mission check ride. And this happens, and Fingers gets shot down. The SA-3, he was defending against one, and another one came up from behind, classic ambush tactic. Now, at the time, we didn't admit all this. It was reported after the war was over, but... So the one that detonated in the SA-3 had a pretty big warhead, so it detonated close enough that it took out the engine and the hydraulics, so didn't hurt him. But it was now a 40,000-pound glider, so he's heading towards Bosnia to save ground, but far enough away from it, he's not going to make it. So if I were in that situation ever, I'd only pray that I had the presence of mind to be as calm, cool, and collected as he was that night, because his last announcement to the guys was, "All right, boys, I'm out of here. Come and get me."
Come and get me.
And then he ejects, And so now Jammer, my friend, is going from strike leader to on-scene commander for a search and rescue mission. The same night, I was driving my 2-ship down the Adriatic to go do CAP in Albania, looking into southern Kosovo, which we did every night, to include CAPs over Bosnia and Sarajevo and Tuzla as well. And so the whole shooting match gets turned off, and I now get rerouted to go CAP over Tuzla, which is the closest CAP to where they think the airplane is downed.
Oh, headed, yeah.
You know, thinking that with I'm carrying 4 GBU-12s, which are 500-pound class laser guided bombs, thinking that they're going to commit me across the border to go blow up the remains of the airplane to eliminate any classified material being discovered, that sort of thing. Now, that never happened, mainly because we never really had a good working knowledge of how close, you know, Goldstein was to the airplane. Obviously, we're not going to go put bombs down on the airplane if we don't know he's far away from it. But so, yeah, Jammer spent the whole night doing the on-scene commander, leapfrogging his remaining 2 guys to and from the tanker.
Wow.
And by about 7:30 the next morning, you know, we had Goldstein back at the base in the triple nickel bar, all doing shots of Jeremiah Weed to toast our downed survivor being rescued.
Goodness, what a story.
Yeah, and Jammer, to his credit, got a Silver Star with Valor for that effort.
How about that?
Very cool. You know, if we met him at the bar later, I'd say, well, let me get this straight. You're on a check ride with a squadron commander and to get shot down. And not only do you pass the check ride, but you get a Silver Star? Come on. How's that happen?
That's great.
No, he well deserved. I mean, I can't imagine being in that situation. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't care about that made it difficult for him, whereas it didn't need to be that way if it weren't a whole NATO project and all of the idiosyncrasies that come along with, you know, the coalition forces that we had to operate with.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that. Sometimes I wonder about, you know, the rules of engagement when you go over to one of those kind of NATO or those multinational projects. I wonder how that works. And I don't know enough about it to even speak intelligently about it. But I just think sometimes from my perspective, we have our hands tied lots of times. And maybe for good reason, maybe for not, I don't know. But
well, there's the politics, Terry. You know, you got to build a coalition to justify it, and that all makes sense. You know, and you want people to have a stake in the game, especially if it's their own territory, and I get that too. From the basic warfighter point of view, it's just a matter of being able to operate in a way that is, you know, synergetic. You know. But even if you can't do that, at least be able to communicate in a secure fashion.
Yeah.
And we have all of this great technology to be able to communicate securely. But yet when we build these coalitions, somebody can't get up on half-quick radio or they don't have secure comms. So we all have to operate in the clear, which was a lot of times what we had to do in Allied force. And
that's the reason sometimes a lot of times you get.
Yeah. So if you're operating on a clear frequency, you just can't give coordinates for somebody on the ground. You have to.
Hey, here we come.
You have to do it by different codes that we use, and that can slow things down quite a bit. But that's
interesting. So you've been there. You're there 3 years.
Anyway, so Albiano, meant for my first 3 years in the F-16, I got a lot of contingency operations, a lot of combat.
Now that's the high performance jet you're talking about, the T-38 or T-37. It's not a high performance jet, but the F-16, that's a beast. How much did you enjoy that?
Well, it depends on how you phrase the question. When I'm 46 years old and about ready to retire from the Air Force, and I look up to the schedule and they got me on a, high G BFM ride for the guy that just got to the squadron, and I'm like, oh man, can I just get a nice air to grid 5G ride? You know, the high Gs gets a little painful when you get older. But as a young man, you know, pulling the Gs, 9 spinning uphill on a cold day, you know, that's what you live for, and everything in between. I would say it this way. Retired now for 10 years, I guess. Yeah. And I miss the airplane, mainly because of the high performance nature of just flying a plane where you put your nose where you want to go and you go there. Mm-hmm. And it makes such great power. There's really nothing that somebody can get you into a situation that you can't get out of with just the power and the great wing that it has. I miss the airplane, and I miss the camaraderie of being in a fighter squadron. You know, and all of the people that are kind of like you. We all have different likes and dislikes, but you know, everybody's motivated, type A type folks. You know, easy built-in friendships. I don't really miss, the silly factor of the Air Force ebbs and flows, and, and I don't miss taking my job home every night. My job now is I put the airplane in the hangar. Well, not in the hangar. I just chalk it in at the gate and shut the engine down and walk away. And I don't worry about my job until I come back and fly a few days later.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant, actually, compared to, the Air Force, especially as a commander or supervisor where you're taking your job home every week, on the weekends, somebody gets in trouble, you're on duty. I mean, that's the gig. And, I respect it, but it's nice to be retired.
So how long after Italy was it until you and Carol came back and retirement came along?
Well,
and was there anything in notable, obviously, between Italy and retirement?
Well, I don't know about notable per se, but we had several tours. That was the first. I was a captain at the time. So after Italy, I came back to Luke and I did a 3-year tour as an IP, teaching primarily night vision goggle, targeting pod, and forward air control. In the top-off squadron, that's all incorporated now for the most part into the basic course. But back then, that was all top-off training, and that was the squadron I was in. Doing a lot of night flying, loved it. And that's where Carol and I got to have our first house and have a pool out in the back and our own personal oasis.
And where was that?
Phoenix.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And then after that, I took a 3-year stint away from the airplane and went to become the big fancy title, Chief International Fighter Programs. But basically, I was the F-16 salesman for the U.S. Air Force at the Pentagon.
Really? How about that? I did not know that.
And with the Pentagon for 3 years, working in international affairs as an F-16 subject matter expert. Business is good. I think they're up to like 24, 25 countries around the world now that fly the F-16. So my job was to interact with all of those countries, whether they were doing upgrades or program management reviews, or if there was a country that was thinking about buying them, I would go give them a brief. And so I would fly over the world doing that sort of thing. And I'd have the systems program office with me, which is the experts, for these programs. I'd have the country desk guys with me, and primarily I'd have the Lockheed Martin guys with me who build the airplane. So it was a nice little way to spend your let me say it this way. I'm probably one of the very few air staff officers you'll ever interview that actually enjoyed the job at the Pentagon.
Oh, really?
Because most people don't.
Okay.
So, I did that. And then after the Pentagon, got back to the F-16, the Shaw Air Force Base, which is South Carolina. Yeah. And I flew there for 3 years. And then I was going to retire because now I was at the 20-year point. But my wife had decided to become a nurse.
Yeah.
And she had just graduated nursing school. And so I had an opportunity to stay in the Air Force for a couple more years. And that would allow her to get her feet wet, if you were, get her career going. And she got a pretty good opportunity to work at the local hospital in Sumter, South Carolina. So she did that. And I stayed at Sumter for 3 more years and just transferred over to 9th Air Force, which is the headquarters that's based. It's not the Shaw Air Force Base headquarters, but 9th Air Force is the numbered Air Force headquarters. And I worked as the Assistant Chief of Stand-About, then Chief of Stand-About Standardizations and Evaluations. So
gotcha.
Essentially, I was the Air Combat Command Flight Examiner for all of the F-16 units east of the Mississippi River, which turned out to be some of the best F-16 flying I have ever done on my life.
Really? Is that right?
Yeah, Terry, because for 3 years, I would be flying with every Guard and Reserve unit that flew F-16s to include, flying with the local wing and then Shaw, the McIntyre, South Carolina International Guard down the road. And it wasn't just to do check rides, although that was part of the job to do stand-about inspections, but just go fly with them whenever they had a holder schedule just to, keep in touch. So
amazing.
I'd be flying with the Mako Sharks down in Oathstead one week and then flying with the Montgomery Red Tails the next week. And then I'd be home for a week and my boss would be like, man, you've gone a lot. Shouldn't you be home doing some staff work? And I'm like, all right, I guess I'll hang out for a week and then I disappear and go fly with somebody else for a weekend. The neat part for me, although probably was to some frustration to a lot of the guys that I flew with, was all of those units fly different versions of the F-16.
I was going to ask you about what kind of version increases they've had over the years of the F-16. I'm sure they do in all kinds of different ways. But
well, here's a good way to describe it. You do care because you asked, but
sure.
The top of the food chain, is the Block 50, Block 52, at least for U.S. Air Force. We've built what they call a Block 60, which was the only non-foreign military sales F-16 ever sold. That's what the UAE currently flies.
Oh, okay.
It's a very impressive airplane, but that was all commercial sales. So the Block 50, Block 52 GE versus Pratt Whitney motor is sort of our top line. But we have Block 40s and Block 30s, at least when I was flying, and they were still being operated all over the country as well. And they all work differently. Some of them have analog flight controls. Some of them have digital flight controls. The radar is operated slightly differently. The way you call up various weapon systems, what we call the storage management system, the SMIS, that's all different. So, you get used to one because you fly it every day, and then you go to another one and you kind of have to
fiddle your way through it a little bit.
So, I'm giving, I got maybe like couple thousand hours in the F-16, which isn't many. It's a lot, but some of these guys in these guard units, they've been flying the F-16 for 30 years. They have 4,000 hours. They went to weapons school, and there's nothing I'm going to be able to teach or show them. But I'm still responsible to give them a check ride come standard inspection time. So I'm on the wing of this 4,000 hour patchware, in Homestead, and to his credit, I mean, they put together this world-class mission. It's like 6 versus 30 plus aircraft.
Wow. Okay.
Doing a 25-minute lane defense. Well, the bottom line is, I've never in my entire life done a 6-ship DCA mission, which is what this is. We always did it in 4 ships.
Yeah.
But he's doing it with 6 airplanes, and it's so much fun. The modern tactic, of course, for lane defense is important is try to continue to attrit the leading edge of whoever's coming at you. And you do that with radar guided missiles.
Okay.
So we're doing that, just throw missiles down range. And we get to like 24 minutes into the ball, 1 minute left. And there's a single guy coming up, high fast flyer above the Mach. And the only missile left in the whole 6-ship is on my wing. That's the only one. So he targets me in and I shoot. And then the range training officer who has a coin flips it and says, PK miss, which means it didn't hit him. So now you have to go engage the guy.
Oh, okay.
And, it's just like out of shotgun. I'm going uphill towards this guy coming down. I mean, I got this beautiful blue sky, no sun. It's the absolute perfect environment to shoot an IR missile. And I have a high off foresight missile.
Okay.
But I'm not wearing a helmet.
Oh, so it
will cue it. I just spent the last 6 months at Shell upgrading to our brand new helmet-mounted cueing systems, so I can now just look where I wanted the missile to look, and it would go with me. I don't have to throw my radar up there anymore to try to lock this guy. So I'm staring at this guy for like 15 seconds, going, "Why am I getting tone?" And then I realized, crap, I'm in a Block 30. I don't have a helmet on. It was so embarrassing. I merged with the guy. I never shoot him. And then the guy I'm giving a check ride to has to come gun him because I'm in a swirling derby and barely preventing myself from becoming defensive of this guy. So anyway, 9th Air Force in the house, right?
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a great story. It's a great story.
So it was fun flying the different blocks, but it did lead to some setbacks like that.
Yeah. Perfection is hardly attained sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So that was during the period of time that Carol was getting her feet wet. And then I'm assuming that somewhere right after that, it was retirement time. And I think I ran into you, I want to say, I don't know, during that period of time or right after you retired, I said, hey, why did you not become a colonel, or why did you not continue in the Air Force?
Yeah.
And I don't remember your answer, but it was something like, it was just enough. But tell me why you retired and when you retired and what kind of prompted that for you.
Yeah, of course. My entire track, I was setting myself to maybe achieve higher rank. I certainly wasn't against the idea.
Yeah.
I demonstrated much to my surprise, some diplomatic capability in my job in the Pentagon.
Yeah.
That's what led me to get promoted to lieutenant colonel, the job that I did there.
Okay.
And the 2-star who was impressed by it. So I'm like, all right, my career's back on track. Here we go. And I got to Shaw, and I was given an opportunity for command, but it wasn't going to be in a fighter squadron. And I wasn't so pretentious, like, I got to be a commander of a fighter squadron.
That's right. I want to live, right?
I just got out of the Pentagon. I just got back into the airplane. And now I'm being asked if I would leave the airplane to go fleet up for a command position in a non-flying squadron.
Yeah.
Now, that's the square filling that you do to make your way up through.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really prepared to leave the airplane, so I politely declined that opportunity.
Yeah.
I was grateful to my boss for, going out and looking for something for me, but I didn't want to leave the airplane. So sort of a personal decision, to stay in the airplane, stay in South Carolina. Carol wasn't going to nursing school at this point, but we had just bought a house and I didn't like the idea of having to sell it. So I said no. And in the Air Force, unless you're a superstar, and
that was my question.
if you turn down command and
that's where it stops.
you don't get asked a second time.
Oh, goodness. I wondered about that.
So but it's fine. And after, the commander of U.S. CENTAF at the time before they split 9th Air Force, I flew with him a bunch as sort of an IP on his wing because he still flew as an active pilot, even though he was, a 3-star general at the time. So he knew me, was fond of me for some reason. I have no idea why. And so he's the one that direct hired me into 9th Air Force. So that allowed me to continue to fly F-16s in that role while Carol got her career going. And so I was ready to retire. This would have been 22 years now, 18 in the F-16. Yeah. And just before I retire, I get an opportunity to consider being a graybeard. And to point that in the direction that you're clearly wondering what I'm talking about. When I was a FATE back at Columbus, where I met Carol, the last 2 years that I was there, there were a couple extra lieutenant colonels in every squadron. In an Air Force squadron, you have 2 lieutenant colonels. One's the squadron commander, one's the operations officer.
Gotcha.
Maybe a couple of majors that are assistant operations officer, and the rest of the squadron's captains and lieutenants. So, in a flying squadron, have a couple of extra line IPs that are lieutenant colonels on active duty is sort of an odd situation. But I remember earlier I was telling you about how we got to be super heavy with first assignment guys. So the Air Force decided, well, we got these, tactical guys have been flying fighters for years. They're going to retire. Let's see if we can get them to stay in for a few more years and just come be line IPs teaching in the T-38 on the flight line every day.
So that's the graybeard?
They call it the graybeard program. Okay. And then they shut it down because they're paying lieutenant colonels a lot of money to be line IPs in that pilot training.
All right, let's regroup.
But then years later, just about the time I'm going to retire in 2022, I get a call saying, hey, that graybeard program, we're standing it back up.
Wow.
We need some tactical guys to go be mentors and chief pilots. What do you think?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, where do you want to send me? And they're like, I'll send you out to Texas. We have a pilot training base out to our Shepherd Air Force Base, northwest of Fort Worth. I'm like, okay, let me talk to the missus. It seemed like a neat opportunity, but I was pretty sure if I retired, then I was going to be able to be a sim instructor at the base, and Carol could have remained a nurse there. And we like South Carolina, so we were going to live there. It was going to be a nice life. So I was kind of hesitant. But I went home and asked her what she thought. She's like, well, you dummy, ask them if they'll make a Columbus. I'm like, brilliant. That's why I married you. 9 reasons. We have a house there. The house that she grew up in, when she now owned, her mom and dad had since retired and moved to Laurel, Mississippi, where they grew up. So the homestead was just sitting there empty, so it's, 8 hours from Sumter. So, we could live long distance. She could just keep being a nurse there.
How about that?
So I called them back and countered with, can you make a Columbus? And they did a little punching on the keyboard and said, you got it.
You're in.
So for the last 2.5 years of my active duty career as lieutenant colonel, my only job in life was to teach and fly in the T-38 twice a day.
Wow.
In an undergraduate pilot training squadron. And it was glorious as a graybeard until they permanently shut that program down and said, all right, time for you to retire.
Time to retire. So by this time, you go back to high school, you don't want to be a pilot. Finally, by this time, you're in the F-16. You get to the end of your career. You must have just absolutely loved to fly.
Yeah.
You just must have created this sense of, this is what I'm made for.
Well, I was listening to part of and reading a story about Jerry Seinfeld giving a commencement address this last weekend.
I listened to it today.
Duke University.
Listened to it today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point in the podcast, I if you ask me the why question, I probably refer to that again as well, because I realized when I listened to his podcast, well, that he's describing why I was able to at least make some modest success in my life.
Yeah.
Well, you probably remember the three things he mentioned, right? Bust your ass, pay attention, fall in love.
Yeah.
And I can discuss that stuff ad nauseum because that was sort of my life.
Yeah.
But something else he said, which I think is germane to your question about loving flying, is I didn't really have a passion for flying. I wasn't chasing something that I was passionate about, but I had a fascination about it. Mm-hmm. And that was enough. And I think that's important in life. You chase something that, you're fascinated by. And then over time, you might very well create a huge passion in your life for it. So yes, at first I was just fascinated by the idea of being challenged to do something that I thought was fun and it would be a nice way to earn a paycheck. But over the years, I became quite passionate about flying, and now I just absolutely adore it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And most of these podcasts, I always want to bring it back to the youth of America and the youth out there that are really kind of lost in that thought process. I want to make a difference, and I want to be passionate about my job, and sometimes it takes taking a risk and following something that you're fascinated with, like you're saying, and that just perhaps that fascination will turn into a passion.
Right.
And I think that's a really good lesson in your story, is that you weren't necessarily chasing flying or chasing the Air Force. You were fascinated with mechanical stuff. You were fascinated with engineering. You became proficient at it. You took a risk because you were fascinated with flying, and it eventually became this, I don't know, I'll call it a wonderful story of purpose. And I think that's a tremendous message to young people. I have two sons. Well, my youngest son was passionate about football from the beginning. It became his purpose, and he just spent everything. My oldest son, Trevor, is fascinated with golf. He's very good at it, but he hasn't found that passionate purpose yet. And so I just think if people can hear this and say, here's a guy that was not born to be a jet fighter. He was interested enough in the things he was good at and was fascinated enough with them that it eventually became a purpose and a passion. I think that's such a good story.
Yeah, Terry, I appreciate that. I would just add that long before I, pursued an engineering degree, I worked summer jobs in a hardware store, painting fences, trimming the hedges around the local bank. And that wasn't passion. That was just a way to make a few bucks to take my girlfriend to Hershey Park on a Saturday night. But it still gave you meaning. It gave you a sense of gratification to do that job really well. So I could take it back to, Mike Rowe's philosophy is like, we're not going to all have the job that we're immensely passionate about, and certainly maybe even something we're not fascinated by, but whatever job you do have, at least from my story, I did it with, a sense of purpose that I wanted to be the best person at that job that they'd ever seen, even if it's something I knew I wasn't going to be doing in 20 years. Mm-hmm. And that really does give you a sense of work ethic and a pride in a job well done and discipline. And also, you're getting paid from somebody that expects you to provide a service to them, and you want to not let them down, not have them be disappointed in you. Right. So it's not going to always work out where your first, second, third, or even fifth job is the one that you are pursuing, but you still have to do them to the best of your ability and be proud that you're taking it on as a prideful or
not in that way, but being prideful about the job that you do.
Right.
Sure, of course.
Exactly. So that's how it worked out for me. And then I would also add that you talk about the sense of meaning. If you're trying to, give advice to the younger crowd, I listen to a conservative podcaster, and it's not important necessarily, although I really enjoy him. But he read a book years ago that said made a huge difference in his life. So I'm like, I was looking for recommendations of interesting books. And so I picked it up and read it. And boy, he wasn't kidding. And so,
what was the book?
It's called Man's Search for Meaning. It was the story of Viktor Frankl, the famous Jewish psychologist who was a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany and then survived it and wrote a book of his experiences, which it's a hard read, frankly, but in the post-Nazi Holocaust era developed a psychological theory, which he called logotherapy, but I think it's Greek for meaning or something like that. But basically his philosophy, which I hold to be, mine as well, I think it's true, is we aren't here as humans. Our primary drive, is the way he said it, isn't for pleasure. That was sort of a Freudian theory. Our primary drive is to find a sense of personal meaning. And the whole book is how you can find meaning in your life, even under the worst circumstances. You can't imagine a worse circumstances than being a prisoner of war in Nazi Germany. But yet you can still find a sense of purpose and meaning in your life. And that's what we're driven to as human beings. So, I was just lucky that I had a purpose, that I didn't even know I was pursuing. But looking back, it gives me a lot more, meaning. It's more meaningful to me, I guess I should say it, than just whatever little pleasures you might have along the way. A sense of accomplishment, to be sure, but also something that really does make you feel like you're contributing.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about Carol. I know how much she means to you and how much of a support and helpmate she was for a lot of years. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk about her a little bit and what she means to you.
Of course. We were married for 26 years. My goal in life, what I strive for just about on a daily basis, was to be reasonably competent at whatever job I was doing. In this case, fighter pilot, now airline pilot. But my second and primary function was to never let her feel regret for marrying me. So I strived for that. I hope that I achieved it. I don't know for sure. So I was sent to Columbus thinking that, what am I going to do in the Deep South? And then, a couple of bad relationships after another, because you're a young lieutenant, chasing Mississippi State girls around, so.
Deep in South, deep in love.
It's a fun life, but I was looking for companionship, frankly, Sure. I was never kind of that guy, but no matter. If you're a young lieutenant in the Air Force flying planes, even you have a chance,
Sure.
And so that was sort of the lifestyle. But Carol, similarly, as a beautiful young woman, was working on the base and in the local bank as a teller. All the pilots were chasing her around as well. So I just happened to know from looking at me now, but I was a bit of a gym rat back then. My workout partner, Hector, he saw me in this terrible relationship, and he's like, my wife knows the perfect girl, and his wife was friends with Carol.
How about that?
And his wife's like, we got to get these two together. So they set us up on a blind date.
Wow.
And then Wednesday before the Friday blind date, this gorgeous girl comes riding by my house as I'm pedaling my bicycle one direction, and she's pedaling her bicycle in a different direction. And I don't know what conspired to have us stop and talk to each other, but we did. And in about 20 minutes, we realized that we were the blind date.
Another moment in time that was meant to be.
We politely declined the invitation, and then I took her out, just her and I.
How about that?
So there you go. That old Deep South assignment worked out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. So a year later, we were married. She was the consummate adventurer. If you read the eulogy that I wrote for her when she died, not only did she learn to speak Italian, but in Korea, she taught English to Korean kids at a school. Took me scuba diving in Thailand because she didn't want to come home for our mid-tour. She wanted to go visit somewhere fun and do something fun. We go to this resort, Phuket. I just want to hang out on the beach for a week, and we're getting the tour, and she sees, diving lessons, and she's like, I want to do that. I'm like, 4 days of being in the class for on vacation. Yeah. Well, I know a famous comedian once said marriage is about compromises, right? Yeah. Like when my wife wanted to get a cat.
Yeah.
I didn't want to get a cat. So I compromised and I got a cat.
That's right.
Well, so I compromised and we took scuba dive lessons and it ended up being something we ended up sharing together for many, many years. So she was like that.
Yeah.
And the perfect military spouse, and that she made the most out of every single assignment, worked different jobs, everything from teller and bank manager to car salesman at U.S. overseas military car sales. And then once I retired from the Air Force, and we were both living in South Carolina in a house that I still own down there, thinking, I'll just be at Atlanta as a Delta pilot because that's what you do.
Sure.
And I'll commute from Columbia and we'll have our life in South Carolina. And then I got assigned to New York and I realized how seniority drives all quality of life. Now, this is well known in the airline business, but it's all due to me as a military guy. So I get assigned to New York as a domestic FO. It's our most junior base. It's our largest base next to Atlanta, but it's still very junior in that people try to leave there as quickly as they can. I mean, 3 bases, cost of living, et cetera.
Yeah.
But, I just thought, man, I'm getting seniority this quickly. I'm not only not having to sit reserve, but I'm actually getting awarded trips that I want to fly, that I like flying. And I can bid my schedule around, she's working as a nurse when she has time off, so we can have that time together.
Yeah.
So I've reached the idea of moving to Pennsylvania where I grew up.
Yeah.
And she decided that, it's worth her pursuit. So we moved here so I could remain a New York-based pilot for Delta and just drive to and from the city for my trips and ride that positive quality of life and the seniority. And we had this whole second aviation career ahead of us.
Yeah.
Where that meant we get to travel for free because we can just hop on a Delta airplane whenever we want and go all over the world. And unfortunately, in 2018, she got diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And, that was kind of the big blow.
Yeah.
So she succumbed to that in 3.5 years. And about 3 years into that 3.5 years, with every single scan and every single blood test just showing immensely positive results. It felt like maybe the treatment that she was on was going to give her, 10, 15 years. But then the cancer attacked her liver. And as you might know, that creates a downward spiral that ended in her dying in May of 2020. Or 2021 rather. So I got to spend 26 years with her, and God bless me having 26 years with an angel. And I know one of your questions that we didn't get to, but I'll offer right now was, do I have a mentor? Well, yes, I do. But I also have a confidant. And this is an old buddy of mine from the Air Force. And, Terry, I know you've been through some hardships. You spend a lot of time after that with coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Sure.
And you'd sometimes need somebody just to beat you around and say, hey, look, I'm going to set you straight in a loving way. And this is what my confidant did for me, because when I was, risking diving into a Jack Daniels bottle, maybe never crawling back out of it, and, not wanting to travel, not wanting to do projects, not wanting to go back to work, he reached out to me like a lot of old Air Force buddies did. And I had known him for a while because we'd reconnected. He's a Delta pilot as well.
Right.
And we went pod training together. And he just pointed out very bluntly and very lovingly that even though it sucks, in 26 years, based on just a handful of things that I talked to you about, but there was dozens more, we were able to have together the life that maybe some people, wouldn't get in 2 or 3 lifetimes. Yeah. So
true.
I kind of treasure that counsel because it was something that I wasn't really focused on. And then I decided to focus on that, what I was given, not what was taken away from me. And that helped a lot.
Yeah. I can tell you when I met Carol for the first time, you and I, reconnected when you came back from South Carolina and decided to go out to dinner. And we went, I don't remember where we went. I'd probably think of it if I thought hard enough, but we went to dinner. And you can meet a lot of people in your life, but there are certain people that you meet that you just kind of go, something different about that relationship, something different about that. And I hadn't seen you necessarily for 25 years. But the thought that really strikes me when we had dinner was, that guy really loves his wife. And I just thought that was for me. I mean, you think of a fighter pilot, you think of an Air Force guy, you think of somebody that's been through the mix and he's hard and, he's a lieutenant colonel. So there's a certain amount of, straight-laced, training that falls into place. But I walked away from that dinner thinking he loves his wife. And I thought that was an amazing trait. And even to date, I mean, we've, obviously over the last 5 or 6 years, we've been closer. I just think that your relationship with her was so evident, so nice, that I felt like I needed to say that. But Carol, wonderful gal, very positive. Interestingly enough, you guys lived across the street from my wife and her family, and my in-laws speak so highly of Carol and how much of an encouragement she was, and I'm sure she was to you right up to when she passed. So I just wanted to say that because I didn't get a chance to spend much time with her, but the very little time I spent was impactful.
Well, thank you, brother. That means a lot. Again, my friend Tim, pointed that out to me. And in every marriage, a bit of a roller coaster here and there, but
sure.
I was very lucky to have a woman, not just that I adored, but it was reciprocated. In fact, it's interesting. I didn't really appreciate that, but it was pointed out to me because I was going through a bunch of pictures to put together a slideshow for her funeral.
Yeah.
And every single one where it's her and I together, you can see her hand right on my heart. And you can see her eyes looking at me in an adoring fashion, and it's unmistakable. Yeah. In all those years looking at those pictures, I never really appreciated that they were all exactly the same when we stood together, how she looked at me. And other people saw that. I knew it, but I didn't see it. But it was fun to watch other people react to it. I wish that it would have worked out differently, clearly.
Yeah.
But I am so glad that God blessed me to have that time with her.
That's a wonderful sentiment.
And I'm so glad that she's no longer in pain and witnessing the glory of God that hopefully one day I'll be able to as well. But poor girl, died way too young.
Amazing. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I wanted to give you that opportunity if you wanted to.
Well, if you watch my Ducati, which is no longer a race bike, it's more of a track day bike when it's not broke. Yeah. Just broke again at VIR over the weekend.
Oh, boy.
Remember I told you, I talked, it was my last thing that I was going to do that we used to share and I was passionate about to see if I still enjoyed it. Well, I do. I really like it. So halfway through the day when my bike broke, I'm like, oh, come on, man, you kidding me. But I run number 26 on my race bike now. It was the race number. Changed it from 14, awesome, which was my high school number, because that's how many years we were married.
Good for you.
So everybody says, hey, are you a Danny Petrosa fan? Because he was a famous MotoGP racer that ran. And I'm like, no, who's that? No, I'm a Carol fan. Why'd you get that number? That gives me a chance to tell the story.
That's great. Yeah.
So I just like it.
Well, that's good. I know that's a little hobby of yours. Call it a little hobby. I know she walked in with a Ducati shirt on, so I was going to get to that. But I just want to say I'm really happy you decided to do that. To do this. I've enjoyed kind of reconnecting with you, getting to know you as a man. I knew you as a high school baseball player. That's about it. Had a lot of respect for you then, have more respect for you now. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do this, because it not only means a lot to me. I think there are a lot of little nuggets that people can pull out of a story like yours that's maybe a little untraditional on the way to something that you are passionate about. Just lots of stories and lots of nuggets they can pull out of that. So I just want to thank you. Appreciate that. And anything you want to say on the way out the door, now's your time.
Oh, wow. Well, it was my pleasure, Terry. Thank you for hosting me. Yeah. Don't listen to me. Listen to Seinfeld.
He's a smart guy.
Bust your ass, pay attention, and fall in love.
Yeah. All good things.
Those are the secrets.
All good things. Well, this is certainly one of my favorites times, mostly because I love you as a brother, and I appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to seeing this go out, and people can take the time to listen to it, to get something from it. So thanks for coming in, and welcome to season 2. So all of you tuning in to Grinding Growth to Greatness, thank you for being here with Lieutenant Colonel Mark Borocz and his story. We've had a great time with Mark today, and I look forward to next week. when we have a great guest as well. So thanks for tuning in. Welcome to season 2, Mark. Appreciate you, brother.
Likewise, Terry.
Awesome.
You've been listening to the Grind to Growth to Greatness podcast. Our passion is to talk to the brightest entrepreneurs, CEOs, creators, athletes, anyone who's made it, and dive into their struggles, their successes, and their secrets. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Grind to Growth to Greatness. See you next time.